6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan stood triumphant. The rising sun stretched across the Pacific, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the distant islands of the Central Pacific. Yet behind this brilliance, Japan faced a grim truth. The United States had not surrendered. Despite every victory, America's industrial might loomed like a storm on the horizon. Japan knew that time was not on its side. It needed a decisive blow, one powerful enough to cripple American morale and force Washington to the negotiating table. The key lay with the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and more specifically, its aircraft carriers. Destroy the carriers, and Japan could control the Pacific unopposed. But how to lure them out from the safety of Pearl Harbor? The answer: attack a place the Americans would fight to defend. After long debate, the Imperial Navy's high command chose a small atoll called Midway, 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Strike and occupy Midway, draw the American carriers into a trap, and annihilate them once and for all. It was named Operation MI. In tandem, a northern diversion called Operation AL would attack the Aleutian Islands to further confuse the enemy. By early June 1942, the Kido Butai, Japan's elite carrier strike force, was steaming toward its destiny. Its commander, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, led 4 of Japan's most powerful carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu. Together they carried over 240 aircraft and the most skilled pilots in the world. The Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, was a converted battlecruiser, fast, spacious, and deadly. Kaga, slower but heavily armed, carried the largest air group. Soryu and Hiryu, the younger, faster sisters of Carrier Division II, were sleek and efficient, though lightly armored. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi commanded them, a bold and fiery contrast to Nagumo's cautious by-the-book temperament. Though Nagumo had little experience with naval aviation, he was the senior officer and commanded the 1st Air Fleet by rank. The Kido Butai had proven unstoppable at Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean, and the Philippines. Now it was ready for its greatest test. Their mission was twofold. First, destroy Midway's airfields and defenses ahead of the invasion convoy arriving 2 days later. Second, remain ready to destroy any American carriers that appeared. To achieve surprise, Nagumo's fleet sailed under radio silence across 3,000 miles of open ocean. But signs of trouble were already appearing. Japanese intelligence noted unusual American activity around Midway, far more than expected. Still, with their submarine picket line reporting nothing, Nagumo believed the enemy carriers remained safely in Pearl Harbor. Confident, he pressed on. June 4th, 1942. Dawn broke over a calm Pacific. The sea shimmered beneath scattered clouds as the Kido Butai turned into the wind to launch its first wave. At 4:30 a.m., in just 10 minutes, 108 aircraft thundered into the air, bound for Midway. It was a flawless launch, precision and discipline born from years of training. The strike was led by Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, a veteran of China's air war. His target: wipe out Midway's airfields and coastal defenses. Meanwhile, 7 scout planes were launched from Nagumo's cruisers to search a vast 176,000 square mile sector. An inadequate coverage, but Nagumo was confident no threat existed. One of these, from the cruiser Tone, was delayed 30 minutes, a delay that would soon shape the entire battle. At 5:32 a.m., the first crack in Japan's plan appeared. A U.S. PBY Catalina patrol plane sighted the Kido Butai and broadcast its position. Nagumo's advantage, surprise, evaporated instantly. He knew now that Midway's defenders would be ready. Still, his attack group pressed on. By 6:20, American fighters scrambled to intercept. 18 obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and 6 Wildcats. Against the agile Japanese Zeros, they were slaughtered. Within minutes, 15 U.S. planes were gone. The Japanese attack reached Midway moments later. Dive bombers and torpedo planes rained destruction on the base. Oil tanks erupted in fire, hangars were shredded, and command centers were leveled. Yet, crucially, the runway survived. Midway was bloodied, not broken. 11 Japanese aircraft were shot down. 14 more were too damaged to fly again, Anisa. Nearly a quarter of the strike force lost. Tomonaga circled, surveyed the damage, and grimly radioed Nagumo. Second attack required. On the flagship Akagi, Nagumo faced his first major decision. He could rearm his reserve strike group for a second attack on Midway, or keep them ready with torpedoes, in case American carriers appeared. Yamamoto's orders were clear. Keep half-armed for ship attack, but with no enemy. Carriers sighted and Midway still operational, Nagumo hesitated. At 7:15, he made his fateful call. Disobeying orders, he ordered the reserve planes rearmed with land bombs for a second strike on Midway. Below decks, ordnance crews worked furiously, swapping torpedoes for bombs in the crowded hangars. Then, at 7:45, chaos struck again. The delayed tone scout plane finally reported contact. Sighted 10 enemy ships. Nagumo froze. Were they destroyers? A carrier task force? The report was vague and late. A 30-minute delay that now meant everything. He ordered an immediate halt to the rearming process, throwing the hangars into confusion. Bombs and torpedoes lay scattered across the decks. Half-loaded planes waiting for orders. Nagumo had only 15 minutes to choose. Attack immediately with a partial strike, or recover Tomonaga's returning planes first. His carriers could not launch and recover simultaneously. They had to choose one or the other. The clock was ticking. Tomonaga's strike would soon run out of fuel, forcing them to ditch at sea if not recovered by 8:45. To launch a new attack first risked losing dozens of planes to fuel exhaustion. Unacceptable. To wait risked giving the Americans the initiative. Trapped between bad options, Nagumo chose caution. He would recover his planes first, rearm, and then strike with full force. It was a doctrinal, safe choice, and one that would seal his fate. As Nagumo's staff scrambled to manage the chaos below decks, the morning sky erupted once again. At 7:10, radarless lookouts spotted new attackers, 6 U.S. Navy Avengers and 4 B-26 Marauders from Midway. They came in low and fast, intent on striking the carriers. Zeros pounced immediately, turning the sky into a storm of tracer fire. The American torpedo bombers pressed their attack with suicidal courage. 2 managed to drop torpedoes at the carrier Hiryu, both missing. The B-26S dove on Akagi, launching their torpedoes through heavy flak. 1 bomber, shredded and aflame, turned straight toward Nagumo's bridge in a desperate ramming attempt. Officers screamed. The plane missed by mere meters and plunged into the sea. The near miss shook everyone aboard. The enemy's bravery defied belief. In minutes, 7 of the 10 attackers were downed. Yet Nagumo's heart was pounding. The Americans were hitting back faster than expected. Between 7:30 and 8:30, wave after wave came at them. 16 Marine Dauntless dive bombers from Midway attacked next. Poorly trained, they released from too shallow an angle. Bombs splashed harmlessly wide as Zeros ripped them apart. Half were lost. At 8 o'clock, 15 B-17S arrived from 20,000 feet, their bombs falling like silver rain. The carriers weaved hard, turning at full speed to evade. The sky thundered, but not one hit landed. Photos from the attack show the Hiryu and Soryu twisting through near misses, geysers of water towering beside them. It was a ballet of death, and the Japanese won every round. Still, the constant harassment forced the fleet into violent, evasive maneuvers, making it impossible to launch new aircraft. Nagumo's hangars became a nightmare. Bombs half-loaded, torpedoes rolled aside, fuel lines snaking across the decks. Below, sweat-drenched crews tried to switch the ordnance back to anti-ship weapons after the vague sighting report. But now everything was in disarray. Then came more trouble. At 8:27, a final attack from 11 old Vindicators hit from the southeast. Their target wasn't even a carrier. They dove on the battleship Haruna, scoring nothing. At 8:25, a U.S. submarine fired a torpedo at Kirishima, narrowly missing. The destroyer Arashi peeled off in pursuit, leaving a gap in the carrier screen. By 8:37, the air assaults finally ceased. For nearly 90 minutes, the Kido Butai had been under continuous attack, harried but unscathed. Not one bomb or torpedo had struck home. The Japanese shot down 52 American aircraft and lost only a handful of fighters. It was an incredible display of discipline and luck, but those 90 minutes cost Nagumo something far more precious than planes. They cost him time. Below deck, the ordnance chaos worsened. The rearming and re-rearming left the hangars filled with volatile fuel vapors, bombs, and torpedoes lying side by side, unsecured. Yet above, the sea seemed calm again. Nagumo seized his chance. Between 8:37 and 9:10, he began recovering Tomonaga's returning strike group, the flight decks filled with damaged, fuel-starved aircraft landing in rapid succession. Pilots leapt out of cockpits as deck crews rushed to refuel and rearm them for the next strike. Nagumo still intended to launch his counterattack as soon as recovery finished. He just needed 45 minutes of peace to prepare. Unfortunately for him, fate had no intention of giving him that. The moment Tomonaga's last plane touched down, new reports arrived. Enemy aircraft approaching again, this time from the northeast. At 9:40, the first group of American torpedo bombers from the carrier Hornet came screaming in. 15 TBD Devastators, slow, vulnerable, and unescorted, charged straight at the Japanese carriers. 30 Zeros dove to meet them. The sky became a massacre. The American planes flew barely 100 knots, easy prey for the faster, agile Zeros. Explosions dotted the horizon as Devastators disintegrated mid-air. Only 3 reached torpedo range. Their attacks missed completely. 14 of 15 planes were destroyed. 1 man survived. As the last wreckage fell into the waves, the Japanese congratulated themselves. Their defense was flawless. Yet, Nagumo's nerves were stretched to the limit. 3 hours of unrelenting tension had left his ships running on fumes. He needed to get his counterstrike airborne, but the attacks kept coming. At 9:50, another group of torpedo bombers appeared, this time from Enterprise. 14 more Devastators roared in, targeting Kaga and Akagi. The Japanese again turned sharply into the wind, evading every torpedo. 9 U.S. planes were destroyed in minutes. The rest fled, riddled with bullets. Still no hits. At 10:10, as the smoke cleared, a third wave appeared. 12 torpedo bombers from Yorktown, accompanied by 6 Wildcats flying cover. For the first time, the Americans used a new defensive tactic, the Thatch Weave, invented by Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch. As Zeros dove to intercept, pairs of Wildcats crisscrossed paths, each covering the other's tail. Shocked Japanese pilots found themselves caught in deadly head-on passes, losing 4 fighters almost immediately. 11 of the 12 torpedo bombers reached attack range, more than any group before. The Kido Butai turned sharply, twisting to dodge. Their luck held. Every torpedo missed. But the engagement had an unseen consequence. The dogfight drew nearly all the Japanese fighters down to sea level, chasing torpedo bombers in the northeast. Above, the skies were suddenly empty. For the first time that morning, the carriers had no fighter cover. It was 10:20 a.m., and high above, 50 dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown were arriving undetected directly overhead. At 10:22 a.m., the heavens opened. From 19,000 feet, 50 U.S. Navy SBD Dauntless dive bombers plummeted towards the unsuspecting Japanese carriers. They had stumbled upon the Kido Butai at the perfect moment. Fighters drawn low, decks cluttered with fueled planes, and scattered ordnance. The first wave, from Enterprise, split into 2 groups. One squadron turned for Kaga, the other for Akagi. Moments later, Yorktown's bombers found Soryu from the opposite direction, the sky filled with shrieking metal. At 10:24, Kaga was hit first. 30 Dauntlesses dove almost simultaneously, their dive brakes whining as they plunged near vertically. Bombs ripped through her flight deck. One struck the bridge, killing the captain instantly. Another slammed into the hangar, where rows of armed planes exploded like dominoes. Within seconds, Kaga was an inferno, flames shooting hundreds of feet into the air. The ship's crew fought desperately, but the fires spread faster than any hose could contain. The carrier that had once helped destroy Pearl Harbor was now dying in the Pacific sun. At nearly the same instant, Soryu was hit. 13 Dauntlesses from Yorktown dropped 3 bombs that tore through her decks in a perfect line. Each ignited a hangar full of fuel and explosives. Within minutes, Soryu became an inferno as well, rolling helplessly, her crew abandoning ship. Then came Akagi, Nagumo's flagship. 3 Dauntlesses from Enterprise broke off from the attack on Kaga and dove on her at impossible speed. 1 bomb missed. Another exploded near the bow. The third hit squarely amidships, punching through the flight deck into the hangar. At first, it seemed minor, but inside the hangar was stacked with armed planes, fuel lines, and loose ordnance. The explosion triggered a chain reaction of secondary detonations. Fire spread through the decks, consuming the ship's heart. In less than 5 minutes, the pride of Japan's carrier fleet was finished. Nagumo stood on Akagi's bridge, speechless, as his flagship burned beneath him. The fleet that had ruled the Pacific for 6 months was destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Smoke and fire filled the horizon, the smell of burning oil choking the air. Sailors dove overboard as magazines detonated. Above, the Dauntlesses banked away, their radios crackling with disbelief. Direct hits on 3 carriers. The Kido Butai was annihilated. Only Hiryu, the 4th carrier, remained, untouched, further north, her position unseen by the attackers. The battle was not yet over. Rear Admiral Yamaguchi aboard Hiryu refused to accept defeat. His was now the only carrier left in the fight, and he intended to strike back with everything he had. Within minutes of the disaster, Hiryu's flight crews prepared a counterattack. At 10:50, 18 dive bombers roared into the air, guided by veteran pilot Michio Kobayashi. They flew south, following the last known American course. At 11:15, they sighted the Yorktown group. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with black bursts, but the Japanese pressed on. The first bomb hit Yorktown's flight deck forward. Another smashed into her amidships. The explosions blew planes and men overboard, killing dozens. Smoke billowed skyward. The Americans fought the fires furiously, damaged control parties flooding compartments and patching decks. Within an hour, Yorktown's crew had stabilized her, proof of American resilience. But Hiryu wasn't finished. At noon, Yamaguchi launched a second strike. 10 torpedo bombers led by Lieutenant Tomonaga, the same man who had struck Midway that morning. Flying wounded, he refused to rest. They arrived at Yorktown around 2:40 p.m. This time, the American carrier's luck ran out. 2 torpedoes slammed into her starboard side, flooding her boilers and knocking out power. Yorktown listed heavily to port, dead in the water. Her crew began abandoning ship. Yamaguchi's pilots returned to Hiryu, jubilant. They believed they had sunk 2 American carriers, not 1. For a brief moment, Japan's fortunes seemed to revive, but the Americans were already tracking the last Japanese carrier. Scout planes from Enterprise spotted Hiryu late that afternoon. By 3:30 p.m., a strike group of 24 Dauntless dive bombers was launched in retaliation. They found Hiryu just before sunset. At 5 p.m., they attacked. 4 bombs smashed through her flight deck, igniting aviation fuel and detonating torpedoes below. The explosions gutted the ship. Flames raced through her hull. Within hours, Hiryu was a burning skeleton. Her crew abandoning ship, Admiral Yamaguchi refused to leave. As the fires reached the bridge, he saluted his men and went down with his ship. By nightfall, all 4 of Japan's carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were gone. Over 250 aircraft and nearly 3,000 of Japan's best sailors and aviators were lost. In a single day, the Imperial Navy had suffered a defeat it could never recover from. Yet aboard surviving ships, few fully understood the magnitude of what had just happened. To them, it felt like another setback, not the turning point of the Pacific War. The fleet limped home in stunned silence, their rising sun banners scorched and torn. The following morning, June 5th, the Pacific was eerily quiet. The wrecks of the once invincible Kido Butai drifted in oily smoke, their survivors scattered across the waves. Japan's 4 finest carriers, the same fleet that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor, were gone. The Imperial Navy's most elite aviators, men trained for years at a cost Japan could never replace, were dead or adrift. The might of the rising sun had been cut in half in less than 24 hours. Vice Admiral Nagumo, rescued from the blazing Akagi, sat in silence aboard a cruiser. He stared at the horizon as if refusing to believe the ocean itself had turned against him. There was no radio chatter now, no cheers, no victory flags, only the crackle of burning fuel and the groans of ships slipping beneath the sea. Hiryu burned through the night until the early hours of June 5th, when her remaining crew scuttled her. At dawn, Yamaguchi's final message echoed across the airwaves: "I will stay with my ship." He and his captain, Tomio Kaku, went down together, standing at attention as flames consumed the bridge. It was the samurai ideal, an honorable death for an impossible loss. By June 6th, the remnants of the Japanese strike force turned west toward home, battered and broken. Destroyers searched for survivors in shark-infested waters, pulling half-burned sailors from the sea. They sang old Navy songs to keep their courage, though every verse ended in tears. Even Nagumo, who had led the most powerful fleet ever assembled by Japan, knew his career was finished. He would later die by his own hand in 1944, a reflection of the guilt that never left him. Back in Tokyo, the news was softened before reaching the public. The government announced a great naval victory in the Aleutians, omitting the loss of 4 carriers. But within the Navy, the truth spread fast. Officers whispered that Midway had been a disaster greater than Tsushima. The naval staff had underestimated American intelligence, American resolve, and American luck. Unknown to Japan, U.S. codebreakers had already deciphered parts of the JN-25 code, allowing Admiral Nimitz to anticipate the attack and position his carriers exactly where Nagumo would sail. What Japan thought was a surprise ambush had been a trap waiting to close. For the first time in centuries, the Japanese Navy had been outthought, not just outfought. The consequences were immediate and irreversible. The loss of 4 carriers meant Japan could no longer take the offensive. Its remaining flat tops, the Shokaku, Zuikaku, and a handful of light carriers, would spend the rest of the war on the defensive. The cream of its naval air crews was gone. The replacement pilots who followed were brave but inexperienced, barely trained before being thrown into battle. The once feared Kido Butai, which had terrorized the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to the Indian Ocean, was now just a memory. On the American side, Midway became legend. Newspapers called it the miracle at Midway, a turning point in the Pacific War. In a single stroke, the United States had avenged Pearl Harbor, halted Japanese expansion, and seized the initiative. From this moment on, Japan would retreat inch by inch until the war's end. But for the men who fought there, Midway was not a miracle. It was chaos, courage, and death, an inferno where fate decided everything. Pilots who survived remembered the smell of burning fuel, the screams of men trapped below decks, and the haunting sight of massive ships rolling over into the sea. One Japanese survivor later wrote, "We did not fear death. We feared that our deaths had lost meaning." In the end, the Battle of Midway was more than a clash of fleets. It was the moment the balance of the Pacific shifted forever. The empire that had begun the war, with a roar, now faced a slow, inevitable fall. Within 3 years, Japan itself would burn under American bombers, and the same rising sun that rose over Pearl Harbor would set in defeat. Yet the ghosts of Midway lingered on both sides of the ocean. For Japan, it was a lesson in hubris. For America, a lesson in sacrifice. And for history, it remained one of the greatest naval reversals ever fought. A single day when luck, skill, and courage collided in the middle of the Pacific, and the tide of war turned with them.